Hey there folks, it's Scott once again and welcome to another video. This time I'm going to be talking about the highly underrated action film Black Rain. This film's now actually 30 years old. It came out September 22nd, 1989. I really think it's a really highly underrated, solid action film filled with great character moments and some good action sequences, and completely introduces us to a bit of a different world compared to New York or the United States. You know, the Japanese underworld and the whole culture of Japan itself. And I'm sorry if I seem a little out of it. I've recorded like 3 other videos, and currently I have my my Roadhouse review being still uploaded. I don't know what's going on with YouTube. It's just taking forever. But anywho, I never done 4 videos in one day, or at least not this long, so I apologize if I seem a little out of it, so there you go. But getting back to this film, I'm going to talk about the cast and the crew here. I'll start off with the crew. The film was directed by Ridley Scott. He did, several notable films before this, like The Duelist, and really his one big box office hit was Alien. Then he did like three films before this one in the 1980s. Like he did Blade Runner, which got some good praise from the critics, but it didn't do that well at the box office. But it would find its audience on home video. And actually, Legend, he did that film with Tom Cruise and Mia Sara and Tim Curry. That film didn't do very well either, but it would later find its audience on video. Then a couple years later, not a couple years, but in '87, he did a kind of a crime thriller type film called Someone to Watch Over Me with Tom Berenger and Mimi Rogers. That film didn't do well either, so he had some flops in the 80s, but luckily this film, Black Rain, with Michael Douglas, this film was definitely a box office hit, definitely had made money worldwide, and sort of definitely got Scott back into the game, Ridley Scott, so to speak. The film was also produced by Stanley R. Jaffe, whatever you want to call him, and it was written by Craig Bulletin and Warren Lewis, and of course the film stars Michael Douglas as Detective Cochran. You have Andy Garcia as Charlie, Cochran's partner. You have Ken Takakura, who is Matsumoto, who assists Cochran, or it's Cochran. That was Cochran, but it's Cochran and Charlie Vincent specifically. And you have Kate Capshaw as Joyce, who kind of caught in the Japanese underworld and eventually kind of helps Nick out later. Then you have Yasaku Masoda as Koji Sato, who was our main villain in this film. Then you have Shiguro Komoya as Osashi. I guess Masumoto's top and main superior, I believe. And then you have John Spencer as Oliver. I guess he was seen earlier in the beginning of the film. You have also a couple notable actors. You have Louis Gussman as Frankie, who was seen in the very beginning, along with Michael Douglas's motorcycle ride scene. You have Stephen Root as Berg, as one of the internal affairs investigator who is questioning Nick about a particular criminal charge involving a police officer. So yeah. So basically, this film is basically about, it's an action thriller film where it's pretty much the story centers on these 2 NYPD officers, which is Douglas and Garcia's characters respectively as or Nick Cochran. I'll just call him Nick, and Charlie, Garcia's character. They basically apprehend this Yakuza Japanese mafia man, and they have to escort him back to Japan since the Japanese embassy wants him. However, once there, he's able to escape their custody because of Nick's and Charlie's lack of knowledge of the whole Japanese culture and their language and all that. And the 2 officers find themselves, kind of dragged deeper into the Japanese underworld, so to speak. But anyways, in the very beginning, Nick is dealing with a lot of issues, like he's facing possible criminal charges because of his partner was caught taking criminal money in a corruption scandal, and Nick himself is dealing with some financial difficulties, divorced from his wife, and dealing with this, and his wife has custody of their 2 children, and he has to deal with the private schools and all that stuff, and so to speak. And basically, whenever Charlie and his partner witness this murder at this restaurant where Sato kills two guys by stabbing one of them and cutting this one guy's throat pretty viciously. Nick and Charlie chase him down, and Nick encounters Sato. This is the guy that killed him in the restaurant, and he almost nearly kills Nick, but they're able to apprehend him. And he's a Yakuza gangster named, like I said, named Sato, and he's to be extradited back to Osaka and given to the police there because he's probably committed quite a bit of crimes in Japan. Unfortunately, he would not be prosecuted in the U.S., so he is basically escorted back to Japan, and when they arrive, they at first believe they surrendered him to the right Japanese police officials, but apparently they found out they were duped by imposters who would then come at another part. They come in at another part of the airplane where they hold up the badge and they realize they've been duped, and so they have to deal with the BS with the they have to deal with the bullshit with the Japanese superiors who they allow their characters Nick and Charlie to observe, but they're only able to observe. They can't carry around their firearms. They've been confiscated. So they are able to observe, like whenever at this club scene they encounter I believe Sato's men or double crossed or whoever they were. The two people are dead. Like they have dollar bills stuffed in there. They are observing. They can't really do anything more than that. And while this is going on, Nick makes contact with the American nightclub hostess Joyce, who the reason why they can't do anything more than just being observers is because they represent American inefficiency and stupidity to the Japanese, pretty much. Which is why, even though they're cops, they're in a different system and culture in Japan. So, and through through Joyce, Nick's able to realize that Sato is fighting a gang war with a notorious crime boss named Sugai, and he was traveling to New York to disrupt Sugai's counterfeiting scheme, pretty much. So that's what's going on, and then eventually Nick goes to Sato's hideout, where Sato's not there, but several of his men, especially the one person in particular that Nick encountered at the airport, and gets in kind of a brief scuffle with him. And noticing that there's like money, American dollars, and even Japanese money, Nick actually takes the money to try to see what's going on. Of course, Matsumoto believes that he just took the money for themselves and has dishonored themselves, and basically his police by theft. But Nick calls him a snitch and actually demonstrates to Matsumoto and his boss that the money is actually counterfeit by burning one of the bills on the ashtray. Then eventually, at night, Nick and Charlie go back, are at a restaurant where they're enjoying themselves, and Nick and Matsumoto have another little fight as well, and eventually he leaves, and both Charlie is apparently a lot more diplomatic and a lot more welcoming, and actually tries to have a little fun with Matsumoto, like they do a little karaoke thing, which is actually one of the humorous parts and one of the levity aspects about the film I liked, and the character himself. And eventually, both of them they leave drunk, even though Nick tried to get some information about, Sugai and what's going on with this whole war between him and Sato, but he doesn't really get much. So eventually, they try to head back to their hotel, a little drunk and unescorted, actually, and they encounter an apparent prank artist basically a young motorcyclist, steals Charlie's coat, and Charlie has to go chase this guy because apparently he has his passport. So he eventually, is being lured down to somewhere in this garage-like area where apparently it was all set up in the first place. And these motorcyclists, there's like several more that come in, and they all surround Charlie, and it turns out that they all work for Sato pretty much. They lure him down. They actually torture Charlie, and they eventually kill him by decapitating his head. And so Andy Garcia's character actually dies within like an hour and 1 minute of the film. And so Joyce, Joyce and Nick encounter each other, and Joyce, comforts the distraught Nick at her apartment. And Matsumoto actually comes down sometime in the morning, hands him, some of Charlie's things, including the pistol. And then apparently both Matsumoto and Nick decide to trail or track down Sato and some of his operatives, and they basically, are able to make amends. They basically, start to open up to each other and get along better and help each other out in the best way they can. Both Nick and Matsumoto. They eventually, follow the operative, and it's actually one of the girls at the club. Like, she's trying to do some kind of exchange, but then they notice one of Sato's men that actually lured Charlie into that trap. They actually track down the gangster. They end up tailing him to a steel foundry where they find Sato was meeting with Sugai and discussing what their plans are, or what really Sugai's plans are, to basically have this printing plates of American $100 bills, pretty much, and they basically have a discussion, and Nick is able to confront Sato and ends up he actually ends up killing a couple of Sato's men, including the one that lured Charlie into the trap. However, even though Matsumoto has notified his superiors, they notice that Nick is waving the gun in public. And Nick comes to realize that Matsumoto was actually just, going against his superiors and, helping Nick out. And as a result, Matsumoto's officials are actually arrest Nick, and they have him deported, but somehow Nick is able to silently escape his way out of the plane and pursue Sato on his own. And of course Nick is able to track Matsumoto at his place, and he of course learns he's been suspended and demoted by assisting Nick and allowing Nick to carry the firearm illegally. So basically, he's on his. But Matsumoto is unable to help him, but eventually he does help him. Like, he actually meets up with Joyce again, who is able to give him some money and certain other items to help to help out Nick for some time. And then she actually gives him some info about where Sugai likes to, play golf and whatnot. And he encounters Sugai, and they basically Sugai and Nick have this discussion about making the counterfeit U.S. currency as his revenge for the Black Rain, because Sugai was part of the nuclear fallout of the bombing of Hiroshima in World War II, where basically they forgot who they were, and basically the Japanese culture at that time, is all about one thing, about money, which is what Sato represents. And Nick suggests where there's a deal where Sugai can use Nick himself to retrieve the stolen plate from Sato, leaving Sugai's reputation and his hands clean. And eventually Sugai, drops him off at this remote farm location. And during all this, Nick is trying his best to, hide within the area. And one of Sato's men spots him, but luckily Matsumoto arrives and ends up aiding Nick and helping him out. And during all this, Sugai meets with Sato, and Sato ends up cutting one of his fingers out for one of his index fingers, for atonement of what he's done to Sugai, and in an effort to hand him back the plate. And he's supposed to drink this particular dish, and then Sato sits next to him and actually ends up stabbing Sugai in the fucking hand and taking both plates with him. And then there's a gunfight that breaks out between Sugai's and Sato's men, where there's apparently going to be a double cross and massacre. And Matsumoto was able to take out some of the men, probably from Sato and Sugai's side. And then Sato is able to escape on a dirt bike with Nick pursuing him. They chase each other on the dirt bikes in the remote farm area, and they end up getting into a physical fight where it looks like Sato's getting the upper hand, but luckily Nick is able to use his messed up finger and have a go at Sato, and is able to knock him out. And then apparently he has Sato at his mercy, because there's a pretty sharp wooden, I wouldn't say stick, but like a protrusion sticking out where he can either kill Sato, but unfortunately he decides not to and decides to take him back to the station. Matsumoto and Nick has walked this handcuffed Sato in the police headquarters to the amazement of everyone, and they receive commendations, which both Matsumoto and Nick accepts gratefully. And then he encounters Joyce, and they, have a slightly, I guess, romantic encounter where they kiss each other on the lips, pretty much. But that's really the only romance they have. So I don't know if it's even romance, but just mutual respect. But before Nick boards his flight back home, Nick, thanks Matsumoto for his assistance and friendship. They basically gain a newfound respect for each other. And then Matsumoto gives Nick a gift, and then Nick gives him a gift. Where they have that little discussion where if you got the 2 plates and all your problems are solved, pretty much. And Matsumoto, as Nick is walking off, he's able to open the box, and there's like a dress shirt in there. But when he pulls it back, he knows there's both plates in there. And Matsumoto, of course, finds the counterfeiting plates and smiles at Nick for basically redeeming himself in the end, where he's now a whole character, and he's definitely done the right thing, and voila, there's your ending. And of course, Douglas's character walks off in the distance. This film, while it's not action-packed, it has its effective action sequences. I think what really makes this film unique is that it shows the Japanese underworld culture, pretty much. Like, you see how the nightclub scenes are dealt with, you see how people are, and you see how the whole Japanese culture as a whole is like, there's like a lot of neon lights, at least at that time. Like, it was completely different. They have just the whole culture is just always grinding with them, and I don't know how to put this, but they did a good job of if it was filmed in Japan, they did a good job of establishing the setting and how the complete world of Japan world can look. Well, it looks nice. There's always this red herring that there's always something more going on. It actually apparently turns out he did film in Japan, but it was a pretty intense shoot from what I imagine. And but I believe the farm scene was actually done in California, and I believe in Napa Valley, California. And but the majority of the film was shot in Japan. I just like how it showed that world and how the authorities, how it depicted Japan, the authorities, and how efficient they can be, how they hold themselves to a high standard. So I thought it was kind of cool. The nightclub scenes and the exterior shots look pretty good. I feel like I'm talking about the pros about this film, and I am to some degree. But I think what makes this interesting is the characters, how Douglas is not really perfect, but he's willing to do the right thing. He's willing to press on. He's willing to, put this scumbag, this low-life piece of shit, you want to call him, away for good, considering that this guy just murdered somebody in a restaurant in a different country and is not facing any criminal charges, but yet Japan wants him back for, I guess, diplomatic, political reasons. So, yeah. I think it's interesting how we get to see that world compared to, how we see the U.S. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think the one flaw, looking back, in all honesty, there's not really a whole lot of flaws, is I wish that Andy Garcia would have lived a little longer, because he was killed rather early. But I guess they wanted to show how vicious and cruel Sato really is. Like, he was able to, excuse me, my nose is itching. So anyway, he was able to set up this whole thing with Charlie, where the motorcycle gang people was able to take his coat, and they basically lured him to that garage, and they basically torched him. Like, they would cut behind his back and they would cut across his chest, and then you see Sato where he takes that very small katana looking knife, and whenever he drives towards Charlie, he scratches around the surface of the ground, which is concrete, and right before Andy is able to say anything, he decapitates Charlie's head. So yeah, because Charlie was a likable character. I liked how he was trying to make things diplomatic. Like, whenever Nick had a problem with the way the Japanese authorities were, and how they they were just there to observe and nothing more. They can't do really anything. They can't really interact physically. And then Douglas tells, or Nick tells Matsumoto, says, "I usually get kissed before I get fucked." And Matsumoto's like, "Huh?" And then Garcia's character Charlie says, "Foreplay." He likes a little foreplay. And I like how in the beginning how you establish the chemistry between Charlie and Nick Parker in that film. Like whenever we see them for the first time, Charlie attempts to do this little bull thing with his coat, and Nick's on his motorcycle where he's trying to grind his get his motorcycle and just grind it out the tires and speeds towards it, then slows down, like comes to a complete stop whenever Charlie takes away the coat, just to establish the friendly chemistry they have, like where he talks about how ladies of the 80s are going for shoes and stuff like that. So I thought it was very unique chemistry, and there are moments during the restaurant, and then of course the moments during the plane where they're talking about one of the cops, Nick's partner I guess, being involved in this corruption scheme business, and and then I don't know what else to say. There's very good chemistry between him and Douglas and Garcia. They really played off each other. It's very upsetting that Andy Garcia didn't get to play a much larger role in the film, but I guess it served its purpose because it got a chance for Coughlin to make up with Matsumoto, he's just there to follow his system. He's just there to do his duty pretty much. He's just there to follow his orders. But of course, whenever Charlie showed him a different side, a more friendly side and diplomatic side, you could tell that Matsumoto was now willing to kind of avenge Charlie and help out Nick in a way, and it ended up getting a friendship with Nick in the end, which was kind of cool. But I'm trying to think of some other moments. There were some nice little moments, like the most humorous levity moment is whenever Charlie is interacting with Matsumoto on this karaoke thing, where they're trying to sing the very classic song where he's like the girl with the red dress on, and I like how Charlie's like going, oh, and then Matsumoto's going, ah, ooh, ah, and then Matsumoto doesn't do a good job, but it's a very fun and humorous scene, so it's done very well. And then there's other comments where before that scene, like right when they're whenever Charlie and Coughlin are trying to find their hotel, tell Mas one good hand job deserves another, and Matsumoto still doesn't understand. He's like, and then Charlie's like, Mas, he does that gesture. So yeah, there's some nice little one-liners, and then when he's talking with Sugai, who has a very deep voice, and he's talking about the history and how Hiroshima being bombed really changed the whole Japanese culture as a whole, and he has a really deep voice where he's like, we forgot who we were. And he's like, why should I trust you? And then, of course, Douglas replies with something like, because you got nothing left to lose. And some of the nice action, and looking back, there's not too many action scenes. I like how there's the one scene where Nick has to chase Sato first, and there's the one scene where when Nick and Matsumoto are trailing him, he's able to have an encounter with Sato where Sato kind of taunts Nick about Charlie being dead. It's actually the only time that the actor Yasuko Masada, who plays Sato, actually speaks English, because throughout the film he speaks Japanese only. He's like, here I am, Nick. Near is when you let Charlie die. And then eventually Nick is actually able to take out one of the Sato's men by gunpoint, and actually takes out the guy that lured Charlie into that trap. And some nice little action bits there. And there's the one real action piece where there's that gunfire war between Sugai and Sato's men. It's done very well. And there's some nice little shotgun scenes and and assault rifle scenes and whatnot. And then, of course, the main fight between Coughlin and Sato was done very well, where he's able to get a few punches in, and Sato really shows how deadly he can be. Even one of his index fingers are missing. He shows how deadly, and even has Nick in that death grip, almost choking him. But like I said, Nick is able to use Sato's messed up finger and just bashes his head into him, and then is able to throw more punches at him. And of course, he has a chance to take away his life, but he decides he wants to actually do the right thing, and shows that Nick has humility and grace within him, and shows that he can overcome um, the anger and rage that's within him since Charlie is no longer with him. But yeah, I think overall it's got some good action sequences. The characters are interesting. I like the actors' performances. You know, Michael Douglas does great as Nick Coughlin. Andy Garcia is great as the very diplomatic and well-rounded, friendly partner Charlie. And you kind of miss the fact that he is his friendliness and gesturing and the willingness to make everyone feel welcome is quite good. And Matsumoto I'll just call him Ken Takakura. As Matsumoto, he does great as the person that's basically just trying to follow his orders and actually ends up helping Nick in the end because of how friendly Charlie was towards him. And Kate Capshaw does okay as Joyce. You don't really see a whole lot of her. You only see her in the club scenes for the most part, and you also see her kind of help out Nick in the end, to track down Sugai and, have money for food and to survive, or at least for a day or two. I noticed how she had these interesting hairstyles. Like she had this very interesting hairstyle where it's kind of wavy and curly. Then there's that one scene where she actually helps Nick, and it's apparently her hair's combed down straight. It's kind of weird. I don't know if it was a reshot scene, but it was a little odd because in the very end, when they interact after when Nick and Matsumoto receive accommodations, her hair's back to that same wavy, curly hair look. So there's a little bit of an inconsistency problem, but yeah, it didn't bother me. I thought Kate Capshaw was decent in that flick. I mean, she didn't have a whole lot to do, which I guess you can say it's a problem in itself, but for whenever she was there, she wasn't too bad. She was trying her best not to get involved, but she ends up, taking a side at the end, and like Nick told her in the end, you gotta take a side in the end. You gotta choose a side. Sorry, you gotta choose a side. And he understands that she took a risk, and they're able to kind of, make amends. Not exactly in a romantic type way, but they do have I guess you can say a physical attraction because they do end up kissing each other just that once. But the really underrated performance was really Sato, which is Yasuka Matsuda. He did a really good job in this movie. And it's too bad because after this film, after it was done filming in March of '89, and the film came out in September 22nd of '89, I think a month or two later he actually died. I think of liver cancer or something like that. I have to go look, but he died like a month after this film premiered, or a month and a half almost. He was actually diagnosed with bladder cancer, actually, well before he was shooting Black Rain. So he actually refused chemotherapies, and as he thought it would affect his ability to act in the film. So yeah, he was going through quite a bit, and kudos to Matsuda. He did a really good job as the villain. And considering the fact that he had bladder cancer, and the fact that he refused chemotherapy, that's tough. That's tough on anyone. So, props to him on that. So, yeah. But anyway, you slice it. Oh yeah, this musical score by Hans Zimmer, it's done very effectively. Like, it has some good themes when the action's there, and whenever Nick has his somber moments, whenever he's mourning the loss of Charlie, and then Greg Allman's song in the very beginning, they all act very well. The music is definitely there. It's definitely well suited for this film. And this was really when Hans Zimmer was kind of early in his career, because he did a movie called Rain Man. I think this was he did a few other films, but this was probably his next most notable film, because this is the one that did the most business box office wise. So yeah, the score is pretty good, and you see that Hans Zimmer would progress from here on out. Doing films like Days of Thunder. I think he did Thelma and Louise as well with Ridley Scott, and probably he did scores with like G.I. Jane. So many. Oh yeah, and the cinematography was done by Jan de Bont. He would do a couple other films, like notable films like Speed 2, unfortunately, and films like Twister. I can't believe I forgot that. So a notable cinematographer would go on to do some pretty notable films of his era, except for Speed 2. And speaking of scores, I forgot to mention in my Roadhouse review that Michael Kamen, he did a solid job in that score for that film. It was very effective, and I could see bits of pieces of like Die Hard and Action Jackson in that score, because he did Action Jackson the previous year. So whenever the score was used in the Roadhouse, it was pretty effective. Like I said, like the action-packed moments where you hear Die Hard and Action Jackson kind of combine, and maybe even I'm trying to think of a notable action. I don't remember, but Michael Kamen's score was fine. It was used very well, and the same with Hans Zimmer's score in Black Rain. It was used very well. It definitely hit on the notes when, especially when Nick mourns for somebody, and when the action's there, or the most somber parts of the film itself. And I definitely like how they introduced Nick whenever he's doing that motorcycle ride, where he's actually betting against one guy. He actually wins the bet. And we see a little bit of how, what his personal life is like being divorced and having to deal with his kids and whatnot. So I like how they showed that. I'm trying to think of what other famous lines. Like I usually get kissed before I get fucked, or tell him one good hand job deserves another, or whenever Nick is encountering Sato's man, and he actually goes against the rule, like whenever this one guy, just throws some kind of piece of paper at him, and Nick just bumps his head like that, and he's like, I just only wanted to talk to the guy. So yeah, some interesting character moments. And then whenever Matsumoto is basically saying that he's a thief, and he knows the kind of man he is, and they have both Nick and Matsumoto have that brief scuffle, and Nick actually pushes him down and says, if you pull it, you better use it. So, but yeah, it has some great action sequences. I thought they did a good job of capturing the whole environment of Japan and what it offered. Looking nice, neon lights on the outside, but noticing that there's always some kind of dark underworld underneath it, and I think the film did a good job of conveying that. So, but yeah. And we see how, in the end, Michael Dudikoff's character is redeemed. He gets to go back home, a new man and a new focus in life, and gains a new friendship with the person that he didn't get along with earlier, and they worked out their differences, and there you go. It ends on a good note. There's no downbeat ending, and I like it. Call it cheesy, call it whatever you will. It's the late 1980s, and I think it did its job very well. Anywho, I don't know what else to say, but I think this film is highly underrated, and I think you definitely should check it out and give it a chance. I think it's on YouTube for a rental if it's on there, so give it a chance. If you like it, buy it. It's really up to you. But anyways, I'm going to end it here pretty soon. I'm very glad that I was able to get this review out, because it's really a highly underrated film. I think it's one of Ridley Scott's top 5 films, at least. Besides Alien and this film, I like Gladiator. I do like Thelma and Louise, although it's been a while since I've seen it. So yeah. And I'm going to end it here soon, and hopefully, if you like this review, give it a thumbs up. Hopefully you liked it, and hopefully you like any of the other stuff. And if you think I should do more stuff, feel free to let me know. I apologize if like I said earlier, if I seemed off, because I'm not used to doing 4 videos in one day, and I feel like it kind of takes a toll on you when you're talking about this. Excuse me, but yeah, there you go. Anywho, hope you liked this video, and I will see you folks in another one at some point. So, later.